Hi guys, I just wanted to do a item and unit tutorial on each of the available items and units that you can use in the game. Now this is going to be long-winded and it's going to be pretty boring, so I suggest you only carry on watching if you're struggling with the game and you want suggestions on how to utilise each item and unit to its fullest. Otherwise, if you're new to the game and this is like the first time you played it, I recommend just trying to figure it out for yourself. This is mainly just to help people who are struggling. So I'm gonna break down each one of the items and units into their strengths, the weaknesses, what's best to use them for, and what you shouldn't use them for. So I'll start off with the pipsqueak. So the best thing, well, the strengths of the pipsqueak is it's free, so you can just use them as much as you want, and it'll help you build up cash. So you can use it with a lot of different things, a lot of different unit combinations, and it just helps you to build up cash. Gives the enemy something to shoot at to delay them, and they do a little bit of damage. Major weakness with them is they die really quickly, so you can't really expect too much out of them. So I recommend using them with vehicles or with small turrets. These to try and conserve using your Warpips. You can use builds that don't require Warpips, like the small turret, the pipsqueak, and something else like the tactician or the heavy gunner. That'll help keep your pipsqueaks, your Warpips available for other more important missions. Now, things that you don't want to use the pipsqueaks for are against gas pips and against enemy structures like the guard tower and the defensive turret and the howitzer. So don't use it against any of them. Okay, the dogs. These are the best anti-hero unit in the game. So every time you see a hero unit, try and take in the dogs when you get a chance. The major weakness to them is they have a huge cooldown, so you can't just use them regularly. I recommend only using them when a hero comes onto the battlefield. If you use it before the hero comes on, you're more than likely going to be on a cooldown when the hero eventually appears, and then you've wasted the use of it then, because the whole point's taking them in on hero missions is to actually use it against the hero. So I recommend not taking the dogs in on missions that don't have heroes, because they are in pretty short supply, so just save them for the hero missions. Here you've got your Warpips. These are your best all-round unit. They're really cheap. They only cost 25, and they can do a lot of different things really well. So it's always good to try and keep a stock of them for when you need them. So if you can get away with doing easy missions without using them, then that's a good idea. Say if you've got a lot of tacticians and a lot of pipsqueaks, you might want to use them instead of a Warpip every single time, just so you can save them for when you really need them. So the major weakness to them is they've got low HP. They will die pretty easily, so you can't really rely on them to survive against high DPS enemies like the buggies and the jeeps. So the major use that I use them for is to survive early rushes from jeeps and buggies, Tanyas, that type of thing, because because they're so cheap, you can get quite a lot of them out at the beginning of the game. Just wait until a buggy or a jeep locks onto your base, and then you can deploy 4, 5, 6 of them, and they'll make short work of enemy vehicles if the enemy vehicle is locked onto your base. So I wouldn't recommend taking them if you're taking, say, a base turret, because the base turret can do a similar job. So you want to conserve these by not always taking them in when you're taking things like base turrets or small turrets. And then you've got your tacticians. These are mainly used for taking out large blobs of the enemies. So on missions where there's huge amounts of infantry, it's really good to take in tacticians just to thin out the huge crowds. Major weakness to them is they've got really long times between their artillery strikes, so you really only get 1 or 2 artillery strikes off before they end up dying. So it's like a one-time artillery strike really, and then they just end up being a meat shield then after that really. So I wouldn't really bother taking them in if you're taking in vehicles, because your vehicles will do a similar job, so you'd rather spend your points on vehicles. So these are mainly an early game unit before you start using vehicles on every mission. Okay, you've got your shield pip. These are amazing at absorbing tons of damage, but they deal virtually no damage themselves. They do a tiny little bit, but it's negligible. So really, the best time to use them is not with vehicles again, similar to the tactician. It's like an early unit, an early game unit. So they pair incredibly well with the tow turrets and say a Warpip or Pipsqueaks. So if you can get tow turrets, shield pips, and Pipsqueaks, and maybe even the tacticians as well, then you'll have a large meat shield, anti-tank, massed infantry killers, and some free units to deal extra damage. So really good early game unit, the shield pippers. Okay, the heavy gunner. So it's the best all-round infantry unit in the game. It's got the highest HP out of all of the infantry units after the shield pip. It's got the highest damage out of all the infantry units. It's really slow, so that's its major weakness, and it's got quite short range in comparison to some of the enemies. But if you use the defense mode with them, then that increases the range dramatically to the point where it's pretty much the same range as an enemy sharpshooter when you use the defense mode. So they work really great in blobs. If you blob up 4 of these and then just use the defense mode when they're getting outranged, they're really powerful. They're great at taking out large blobs of infantry, so they're just really good all-round infantry. So I wouldn't recommend taking them late game when you've got vehicles, but again, really good early game unit. So all 3 of these are really good early game units. I wouldn't take these if the enemy has howitzers or rockets, because the howitzers and the rockets will kill these really quickly, and these are really expensive, so it's not worth taking them in on them missions. Here you've got your sniper, really long range, so it can outrange everything in the game. The only problem really with it is it's very expensive. It's costs 85, so it is an expensive unit. I recommend taking these in missions where the enemy's got RPGs and sharpshooters, but I wouldn't recommend taking them in if the enemy's got vehicles, particularly buggies and jeeps, or howitzers, or rockets really. So don't take them against enemy jeeps in particular, because a jeep will quite often kill all of your infantry, your frontline infantry, and then because they're really fast, they'll just race through into your back line and destroy all of your sharpshooters, and they're very expensive, so it's just best not taking them against jeeps. Here you've got your LRV. It's a really good damage sponge. It'll absorb a lot of hits, small arm fire, and it's really good anti-infantry as well, so on your early missions before the enemy starts using jeeps, it's a really good unit to use. It's really bad against anti-tank units, so if the enemy's got RPGs or if the enemy's got tanks, I wouldn't recommend using it, and you definitely don't want to use it if the enemy's got howitzers. A howitzer will absolutely wreck the LRV, because as soon as the LRV spawns its troops, a howitzer will fire, kill all of the troops coming out, and almost kill the LRV in one shot, so definitely don't use it on howitzer missions. The best time to use it is with tanks as a combo in the late game, the last few missions before you complete the game. Tanks provide anti-tank support while these provide anti-infantry support, so they pair really well together. You've got your Puma. This is probably the best all-round unit in the game. It's kills infantry really quickly. It's also got a tow turret or a tow launcher once it's reached Vet 2, so it can kill small vehicles really easily. And the only thing that it struggles against is enemy tanks, and I wouldn't recommend taking it in against on missions where the enemy's got RPGs either. So really, take it in versus the enemy jeeps. That's the best time to use it. But if the enemy's got jeeps and RPGs, you might want to take something else like the tow launcher with the tow turret with the shield pip and the other combos that I mentioned, obviously. Okay, you got your tanks. These are incredibly high hit points. That's their main strength. But the major weakness is they take a long time to kill infantry, like massed infantry, so you can't rely on them to kill huge blobs of infantry. Their major strength is just to be a tank, basically, to absorb tons and tons of damage. You mainly want to field them against enemy tanks. That's like the major time that you take them in. But you can use them against enemy jeeps as well. They're really good against enemy jeeps. And because they've got quite a lot of HP, they don't suffer from the problem of the Puma has against RPGs, where an RPG will kill this virtually in one shot, where an RPG will take 3 shots or so before it kills a tank. So this is a good alternative on missions where you've got enemy jeeps and enemy RPGs on the same mission. Okay. So next up is the smoke grenades. Now with the smoke grenades, I mainly take them in on missions where the enemy's got mines. Same with the tear gas grenades, so either of the grenades. If you take them in on missions where the enemy has mines, you can detonate them mines by just launching these grenades onto them. And these are available right at the beginning of the mission. So you can start clearing mines straight away as soon as the mission starts. They're also really good once you've destroyed all the mines. They're also really good at keeping your men alive and also making the enemy struggle hitting the target. So fire 1 at your men and 2 at the enemy, and you'll survive a hell of a lot longer than if you didn't take smoke grenades in. But I still recommend taking them on missions where the enemy's got mines, because that's the best use for them really. The major weakness to them is they've got a huge cooldown, so you don't get to use them that often really in a mission. Okay, tear gas is virtually the same as the smoke grenades in the fact that you want to take them on missions where the enemy's got mines. I usually take both of them at the same time so you can clear plenty of the mines out right at the beginning of the game. The extra benefit from this with the tear gas is once you've destroyed the mines, it then releases a load of gas which will kill plenty of the enemy as they're walking through, which gives you an early CP boost, which gives you a chance to say unlock vehicles or get a veterancy up for your pipsqueaks so you can get more pipsqueaks on the field, that type of thing. So gas grenades, really good at that. Again, they've got a huge cooldown, so that's the major weakness to them. I'd only really take them in on missions where the enemy's got mines, because that's the best usage for them. You've got drones. These are the most consistent way to deal with enemy howitzers. It only takes 4 drones to kill a howitzer, so it takes 1 minute and 30 for them to unlock, but after 1 minute and 30 you can basically kill all the howitzers on a map as long as you have a little bit of spare cash. So that's the best time to use drones really, is against howitzers. You can also use them against mines if you've run out of grenades. So mines and howitzers. Unfortunately they're not free, you have to pay for them, they're 10 cash each, so that's the real weakness to them, and they only have 40 I think, or 30, or maybe even 20, I can't remember. They have a limited amount that you can use, so I think it's 20 actually, so you only get to shoot 20 of them before they're depleted and you can't use them anymore, so you've got to be careful about overusing them, and mainly just use them against howitzers, mines, and then possibly structures to get rid of structures a bit quicker. Okay, you got these dumbfire rockets. Fantastic against massed infantry. So on missions that the enemy are fielding mainly infantry, but it's a really difficult mission, so say if it's 9 or 10 star difficulty, but they're mainly fielding infantry, that's when you would take in these dumbfire rockets. They're also good at clearing mines as well, so these two, that and this, are the major mine clearing items. Major drawback to them is you can't aim them, you just have to fire them and hope that they go where you want them to, so they're a bit unreliable. I wouldn't recommend using them on early missions. Try and save them for the missions that are 8 star difficulty or higher. You got your high priority rockets. These are fantastic in the later missions when the enemy's got lots of high priority targets, basically. Say for example, on the very last mission, the enemy's got tanks and jeeps and heroes, all that type of stuff. These will try and specifically target high priority or high value, it says. So these will target high value enemies like them. So they're very similar to the Dumbfire rocket, but they do much higher damage, and they do try to specifically target high value targets. So these are fantastic, really. You've got a quite quick cooldown as well, so you can use them a hell of a lot during a mission. Really, really good, these rockets are. I recommend getting them whenever you see them in the arms dealer. IC7s, these are pretty much the best. Well, this as well, the airstrike, but it has a long cooldown and a 2-minute timer on it, where this has only got a 45-second timer and a shorter cooldown. So I'd say this is the best free to use attacking support weapon available on the game. It'll basically destroy anything in one shot. I think maybe not Bubba. I've got a feeling Bubba's got a tiny bit more health than what this does. But it will destroy howitzers in one shot, it will destroy tanks in one shot, and it ignores shot blockers. So drones can hit shot blockers like lampposts and emplacements that on the boss level there's emplacements that stop you from hitting the howitzers. So these are not as reliable for destroying howitzers because they can hit shot blockers, where these avoid shot blockers completely, and they're amazing. They'll just destroy anything they touch, really. The major drawback with them is they don't have many rockets to fire. You want to take this upgrade with it, so it gets double the amount of rockets to fire. It has 2 instead of 1. But they're very limited, they're very rare. You don't get many in a campaign, so I only recommend taking them on boss levels or against really late missions where the enemy has a lot of tanks and hero units, that type of stuff. Here you've got your airstrikes. So again, similar to the IC7s, they have all the same strengths of the IC7s, but they also do a larger area of damage, so they're actually slightly better than the IC7, but they've got a bigger window and a window that you can't use them, and a longer cooldown as well. So only use them on boss missions and later missions, just like the IC7s. Here you got your base turret. Major strength to the base turret is it lets you build up your cash at the beginning of a mission, so you can just use this to defend for the first minute or 5 minutes, depending on how easy the mission is, and build up a massive pot of cash ready to do a big blob of units. So on really difficult missions against massed infantry, I recommend taking the base turret in to deal with the massed infantry while building up cash. The major weakness to them is they really need the upgrade to be properly effective, so it only costs 10, I think, so always pick that up just before you use the base turret. It's best used on missions where the enemy's got RPGs and sharpshooters, so you can deal with them before they get a chance to shoot you. Phalanx, same as the base turret, just much better. So, but they're incredibly rare. You only really want to use these on the final handful of missions. Oil drums, these are just basically free cash. They're just on a cooldown, and when the cooldown ends, you just get cash for them for free. So you can take them in whenever you feel. If you've got any free slots, just take them in. You get free cash. I wouldn't recommend using them on easy missions, because obviously you want to save these for the more difficult missions. But the hardest missions, you probably won't be able to fit them into your build. So take them on the relatively difficult missions, where you've probably used 5 or 6 slots and you've just got 1 or 2 free. That's when I'd use them. Also on the really short maps. On the short maps, you can't really fit in oil derricks. They're too vulnerable, so you take these instead, because these can't get destroyed. These are just on cooldown and just give you free cash, basically. You got your stim packs. These are, they basically heal you and give you extra health. They doubles the health for a short time, so they're best used with heavy gunners. Heavy gunners have got tons of health. Oh, and also shield pips as well. So they've got tons of health, so they're the 2 infantry units that you want to use them with. I recommend using them in the mid game before you start using vehicles, just to make your heavy gunners and shield pips last longer. It's really useful, but not so much towards the end game when you're using vehicles. Okay, sandbags. Basically, the best time to use sandbags is when you're taking in either of these turrets. So before you put a turret down, put a sandbag down first, then put a turret behind it. The turret will die quite quickly if it gets shot, both of them. But if you put a sandbag down in front of it, they'll survive much longer. So I always save sandbags to use with turrets, basically. You can use them to support your infantry advances as well, but I don't use them for that much really, because I want to save them to make sure I've got them when I use turrets. The major drawback to them is the enemy can also benefit from using them as cover, so just take them with turrets. The enemy don't use them as cover when you've got a turret behind, because obviously they're too busy shooting the turret, so they combine really well. Barbed wire. They're fantastic at killing pistol pips. You kill them in one hit, so they're guaranteed to kill a pistol pip that walks through. But personally, I just don't think that they're worth the cash. I think that there's much better ways to spend your cash, much more reliable ways. If you end up putting these down, 1, the enemy can just walk around them, there's a chance that they won't do anything. 2, the enemy might destroy them with the vehicles if they overrun your men. I don't know, I don't think that they're very good at all, to be honest with you. Definitely don't use them on missions where the enemy has buggies and jeeps. They'll get destroyed almost instantly. Okay, you got your small turret. These are amazing decoy items. So they don't do much damage, but they are fantastic at keeping the enemy occupied. So if you take in pipsqueaks with a small turret and then complement it with something like a tactician, or if you're taking in the tow turret, you'd complement it with a shield pip. But with the small turret, if you take it in with the pipsqueaks, put a sandbag in front of it, then the enemy will shoot this while you flank them with the pipsqueaks. So the pipsqueaks will stay alive for much longer while the enemy are busy shooting the turrets. So pipsqueaks do quite a lot of damage, but they've got really low health. So small turrets are just great at being decoys for the pipsqueaks mainly. That's when I'd recommend using them. They are quite expensive, so that is like the major drawback to them. But definitely don't use them if you haven't got sandbags, because they won't be able to do what you want them to do, which is be a decoy, because they won't have any cover. Tow turret, again, don't take it in without sandbags, but the tow turret is absolutely fantastic for dealing damage to the enemy vehicles. I've done videos on the tow turret about how good it is, and if you haven't seen them, I recommend watching them. Really good demonstrations of why they're so good. They basically shoot incredibly quickly, and they do massive damage to enemy vehicles. So as long as you don't lose them, they will pay back their cost so quickly. And if you use defense button with them, they have absolutely enormous range. So just hold down the defense button for a second until they shoot, and then let go of the defense button while it's reloading, and then hold it down again like 10-15 seconds later. I can't remember how long the reload time is, but if you can have them right at the back of your line with your infantry in front, and they will provide amazing anti-tank support. The other brilliant thing about them is they don't use pip supply, so they're just additional. You can add additional support onto the battlefield without requiring more pip supply, so they're fantastic. They've got very low hit points, so don't let them get shot, basically. But I definitely recommend using them on missions where the enemy's got jeeps, and they're also really good at taking out enemy structures like the defensive turrets and howitzers if you're desperate. Mines, again, mines are amazing, but a lot of people don't use them. They don't realise quite how good they are. They are the most efficient item to kill vehicles and heroes. Any jeep or buggy or hero that touches one of these will die immediately, and they're only worth 10 cash. So you obviously need quite a bit of skill to place them in the correct position so the vehicles don't dodge them. But again, I've done tutorials on how to use these. If you learn how to use them properly, these are the most efficient item in the game, really. Apart from the free to use stuff, obviously. So I recommend just saving them for missions with jeeps and heroes like Tanya's. Definitely don't use them on missions where the enemy has rockets. The enemy rockets will destroy your mines, so if you've got a tank, say for example, on top of your mines and the enemy rocket shoots them, it'll blow your tank up. It'll blow your mines up and your mines will blow your tank up, so never take them on missions where the enemy's got rockets. Okay, you got oil derricks. These are really good on huge maps, but they are really weak and die really quickly, so they're a big risk. If you make a mistake with these, you can quite easily ruin your run, end up losing lives, and if you're on general difficulty you've only got one life. So they're a risky strategy, but if you can figure out how to use them properly, they'll be really useful on later missions. But just make sure, if you are going to use them, don't put them down until you've got a solid front line, and then you can start putting them down. So I recommend only taking them in on missions where you've got vehicles. They're not necessary on other missions if you're not using vehicles, but make sure you've got at least one, preferably 2 vehicles on the battlefield before you start putting derricks down. And then once you've got your derricks down, you'll then be able to have an economy to support more vehicles when you vet up. Pump jacks exactly the same, only much rarer, so you want to only use them in boss missions or maybe the final couple of missions of the campaign. Okay, now on to the enemies. So you've basically got a lot of bog standard enemies which don't really require any specific loadouts. So you've got pistol pips, and you've got shotgunners and warfighters, UAZs and war mules, if I can find one, war mules. They don't particularly require any specific strategy. You can use anything against them. Anything will work. Maybe war mules, you might want to take something with a lot of damage, like the heavy gunner. Something with a lot of HP as well, because the war mule's got a like an anti-infantry turret on top. It doesn't shoot many times, but it can kill a few Warpips. But really, them units don't really require any particular strategy, so I'll just ignore them for now. So the first one that really requires some form of strategy is the sharpshooter. So the sharpshooter, it's got really low HP, so you can kill it really easily, but it has really long range and really high damage. So if you don't kill them quickly, they can do a hell of a lot of damage to you really fast. So I recommend taking in snipers, your own snipers, and heavy gunners to deal with these. If you take in heavy gunners, they will be outranged significantly by the sharpshooter, but if you use the defense mode with the heavy gunner, then they'll pretty much match the same range. So if you do use heavy gunners, just remember to use the defense mode. I wouldn't recommend taking in Warpips or Pipsqueaks unless you're taking in shield pips with them as well. So if you're not taking in snipers and heavy gunners, then definitely take in a shield pip. Let's see if I can find an RPG for you. There we go. RPG. So these reload really slowly, so they are quite vulnerable in between shots, but they have incredibly high damage, so they will make short work of your vehicles, particularly your Pumas and your LRVs, and they're also really dangerous against heavy gunners. The main thing with RPGs is you can outrange them with heavy gunners if you use your defense mode. So heavy gunners are actually quite a good counter to these, as long as you keep some defense mode stocked up for when you see them, so you can outrange them, kill them before they have a chance to shoot. The other unit you want to use against RPGs is the sniper. So snipers and heavy gunners are good against RPGs. You can also just try and like outmass them with pipsqueaks. Gas pips. Gas pips take ages to reload between shots, so you can use that to your advantage. But they do area of attack damage. So if you've got a clump of men, the more men you've got clumped up, the more damage that the gas pip's going to do. The gas pip's also got really high hit points, so it can take quite a long time to kill him. The best things to use against the gas pip are the heavy gunner and the small turrets. So the heavy gunner basically has got so much health and does so much damage, the gas pip will barely do anything in return to the heavy gunner, and the heavy gunner will make short work of him. The small turrets, basically the gas pip doesn't damage the small turrets at all, because it's mechanical. So you can take in small turrets and they'll be able to kill gas pips without the gas pips being able to do any damage in return. So it's Small turrets are good against gas pips. I definitely wouldn't take pipsqueaks against gas pips. They are the worst unit against gas pips. You can still take them if you want, but just don't deploy them until the gas pips are killed. So there are better things to take against gas pips, so you might want to save your pipsqueaks for other missions. Tanyas. Now, Tanyas are really easy to counter if you know what you're doing. You can counter them in multiple different ways. I've done quite a lot of tutorials on how to deal with Tanya, so I won't go through all of them, but you can use dogs and mines, rockets, destroy her own mines as she's walking over them. There are many different ways to deal with Tanya, so she's really easy to kill. But if you fail to deal with her, she will do incredibly high damage really fast. So you got to make sure that you're on top of dealing with her as fast as you can. Vehicles are also a good thing to use against her. Bobber. Again, same as Tanya, really easy to counter in terms of like using dogs or mines, that type of thing. But if you don't deal with him, again, with same as Tanya, he'll do a hell of a lot of damage to you really fast. He attacks quite differently to Tanya. He does a wide sweeping cone rather than Tanya, which is a direct attack. So Bobber's particularly dangerous against your massed infantry. He can also quite easily kill your light vehicles like your LRV. So he is quite a dangerous character if you don't deal with him, but you can deal with him really easily if you take in the right things. Missiles are also a good way. The IC-7 and the blue missiles, they're both good to use against him. Or if you really need to, take in some drones and drone him. Buggies. Buggies have got really low HP for a vehicle. You can kill them really quickly, but they also have really high damage per second DPS. So they're like a glass cannon. You can either kill them really quickly or they can kill you really quickly. So it's all about timings with the buggies. I let them lock onto my base first so they don't shoot my men, then deploy some troops, and then that's the easiest way to kill them at the beginning of the mission. Later on through the mission you can just outgun them basically. As soon as you've got quite a few Warpips or quite a few HGs on the field, you'll just kill them really fast. They won't have time to deal much damage to them. Using shield pips against them are also really good as well, because the shield pip will just absorb all the damage. You got the Grooves, the enemy jeeps. Now these have quite low armour versus the anti-tank weaponry, so if you take in a tank, I think it'll kill it in one shot, or if you take in tows, it'll almost kill it in one shot, so then you'll just need to finish it off with a little bit of small arms fire. So that's the best way to deal with your Grooves. Also, if you take in mines, mines will destroy Grooves really easily, like in one hit, but they're also very dangerous. They've got very high DPS. They'll make short work of infantry if you don't back them up with some anti-tank capabilities. So definitely don't take an all infantry build with you if you're going up against the enemy Grooves. Make sure you've got some anti-tank capabilities. Tows, mines, Pumas, LRVs if you're desperate. Just something like that isn't just infantry. Tanks. these are pretty poor against infantry. You can't kill many infantry in one go, so you can outmass them with infantry as long as they haven't got loads of their own infantry. So I wouldn't recommend taking infantry against them, but they aren't particularly effective against infantry. The major strength of the tanks are the same as your tanks, which is really high hit points. So the best way to deal with them, you want to take in your own tanks, your own IC-7s and airstrikes. If you haven't got any of them, then you can just simply outmass them with Warpips and Pipsqueaks. Definitely don't try to take them on with Pumas and LRVs though, because they'll just get one shot and they're really expensive, so it's just a waste of cash if you try to take them on with either of them. Okay, guard towers. Guard towers can't shoot vehicles, so take in your own vehicles to destroy them and you won't get hurt in return. But they are really dangerous against infantry, like Pipsqueaks in particular, and Warpips. So you can outrange these if you use a defense button, but you find you don't usually have much defense button to use at the beginning of the game, which is usually when you are facing the guard towers. So try to save up your defense button to use against the guard tower to outrange them. Otherwise they will do a lot of damage to you if you don't outmass them. If you don't take a blob against them, they will pick you off one by one. Defensive turrets. Defensive turrets, major weaknesses, yeah, it's got limited ammo where it has to reload. But other than that, it's a very good all-round turret. It can damage vehicles, it can kill infantry really quickly, it's got really high hit points, so it takes ages to destroy them. Even tanks take forever to destroy them, so they're really, really dangerous. But because they have to reload and they haven't really got that much ammo, you can outmass them with infantry. So you can also use things like drones against them as well to take them out quicker. But they are quite dangerous if you don't use a huge blob against them. They'll make short work of them. Howitzers. Howitzers can easily be countered with things like drones and IC-7s and airstrikes. But if you don't have drones, IC-7s and airstrikes, you're going to be in for a bit of a rough time. So the other way to counter them is to take in Pumas or tanks, because if you've only got one unit on the field, then the howitzer doesn't shoot. It only shoots when it can target 2 units at the same time. So if you just take in one Puma or one tank, the howitzer just simply won't shoot. So that's another way to deal with the howitzers. The worst thing about howitzers is they absolutely annihilate your blobs of infantry. So if you can't take in tanks, Pumas, drones and IC-7s, then try not to blob your infantry up. Try to deploy them a bit more piecemeal, bit by bit. Landmines. Landmines can easily be countered with grenades or drones, missiles, so they can easily be countered. But if you don't take in them type of things to deal with these, then you're going to be in for a rough time. You're going to be ending up sending a lot of your men to death. So make sure if you see landmines to take in grenades and drones. And then finally, barbed wire. Barbed wire is not very effective. It doesn't do much, but in some circumstances it can be a real pain in the arse. If you're rolling a pipsqueak build with pipsqueaks and turrets and tacticians, and if you use the defense button when you're near barbed wire, your pipsqueaks will run around trying to find cover. They only need to run through the barbed wire twice and they'll die. So if they run through it once and then you hold the defense button and they run backwards, they'll die instantly. So barbed wire can be a real pain in the arse sometimes. Try not to fight around them. But other than that, they're not very dangerous. You can take them down with vehicles and just drive over them with a vehicle, or you can drone them, shoot 2 drones at them and it'll deal with it. So tacticians as well, the artillery strike from a tactician will blow one up. So you can deal with them if you need to, but usually I'd just recommend ignoring it, to be honest with you. They don't do much. Alright, well, I told you it was going to be long-winded, and if you managed to make it till the end of this, I am shocked. I hope I might have provided you with some decent advice that you'll be able to use. I've just noticed I haven't mentioned the rockets. Basically, rockets absolutely annihilate your infantry and don't take mines against them. So if you see rockets, you want to take vehicles. If you see them start shooting, make sure you don't deploy any more troops. And that's about it really, just take vehicles. And they only shoot once or twice a mission, so they're not that dangerous, but the main thing is don't take your own mines if you see rockets. Okay, so hope these tips helped. If you were struggling before, I hope that you might be able to use some of this information to improve your game. Alright, cheers guys, take care and I'll see you soon.